You're listening to PatchBay on tymkrs.
Welcome to PatchBay, a show where we talk about audio stuff, engineering, music, instruments, stuff like that, amplifiers. Hey, Shane.
Hey, how's it going?
Oh, just fine. We've been doing a little bit of our own audio engineering before the show today, and we completely failed, so yeah.
Well, we didn't fail. It did work. It just didn't work well.
Yeah. Shane's trying to find a better mic solution so you guys don't have to listen to his crappy headset. But we tried a lav today, and it's like a lav from like 1962 or something, right?
Give or take. Yeah, it's from Radio Shack, and they don't call it Radio Shack anymore. They call it The Source.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
It's definitely a few years old. I'm actually looking at the box right now to see if there's any kind of a date on it.
It's probably like 1988 or something.
Interesting. It was made in China, distributed in Canada, and the trademark is for Tandy Corporation.
So. Ooh, so definitely in the 80s when Radio Shack and Tandy were partnered up.
It might actually be worth some money. I was going to take it apart and steal capacitors and crap out of it. I'm amazed it works.
I was mentioning that they've changed the frequencies on those since, and you're no longer, at least not here in the U.S., allowed to use the packs from back then because that frequency spectrum has been reallocated to other purposes. So it's technically illegal here to run transmitters on those frequencies.
Oh, I'm sure it's illegal here, too, and I'm sure my neighbor is probably phoning somebody complaining about something that's not working, but hey, whatever. I got it in a box of audio goodies, so I figured I would give it a go. It does actually work as a preamp as well, and I was amazed at the fact that it worked as a preamp, although the audio wasn't as good as we had a little high-end loss sort of thing. And was there a plosive issue?
Probably. I mean, it's a lav, but you're not usually sticking it right in your face hole, so probably no plosives. But I could definitely hear your sweater. It sounded lovely.
Yes, I know.
It's a very nice sweater, Shane.
I tend to tune my sweaters all to the key of D.
Yeah, well.
Yeah, that way that, if I wear a different sweater on a different day, we're still in the same key. Right. Okay. Anyway. So what do you want to talk about tonight?
Well, I was thinking about metering, actually. So here in my little studio, I've got some analog meters and some digital meters running in the DAW and stuff like that. But I was really curious as to what kind of metering do you rely on every day in the studio?
I usually I have there's a metering on the O1V, and I also
okay, for those who don't know, what's that?
Yeah, it's my Yamaha O1V console. It's a 16 channel 8-in 8-out digital console, which is kind of cute because it's got plugins and EQs and compressors on every channel if you need them. So it goes optical, but so there's meters on that, which I don't really keep an eye on too much because I know if I'm burning the mic pre, because it's a digital link.
You're gonna hear it.
I'm gonna hear it. So if I burn the mic pre, I'm gonna hear it in Pro Tools, and I'm gonna hear it when it hits the board. But normally I'm monitoring pre-fader in Pro Tools. So, and that's usually how I do it. I'm just thinking, why do I do pre-fader? Right. The reason I do it pre-fader is that then I'm getting the actual input signal rather than the input signal in relation to where the fader is.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's normally what I use. I do have a little VU box that is RCA in, and so I have a stereo signal that comes out of Pro Tools that goes to the VU mostly just to light up and go back and forth, although I do keep an eye on it for when I'm mastering, stuff like that. But yeah, normally everything is done just in Pro Tools. That's usually how I keep an eye on things.
Yeah. I don't know. Some of the guys here at the Hackerspace, our local thing, have been talking about building basically a big color VU meter built with color LEDs and stuff like that. And it's always interesting to see how non-engineering people approach the idea of seeing levels and seeing frequency, spectrum information, and all that sort of thing. I think it'd be really cool to have an oscilloscope and a spectrum analyzer attached to the mixing console. I think that would be great, but of course I'm coming at things from a very technical standpoint too.
I know I can totally see the use for having them. Regardless, even in the studio, it's nice. You have to watch with spectrum analyzers if you just keep an eye on those only. I had a little issue a little while ago about that. I could tell that the guy who didn't like my mix was just looking at the spectrum analyzer and he wasn't actually listening to the mix. Like he was seeing it rather than hearing it. But yeah, no, I could totally see having those in line, especially if you've got an older console with auxiliaries, like a ton of auxiliaries that you're not even using for anything. I remember a guy was telling me he had a 24-channel Mackie, not the SR series, but the recording console series. I don't know what they're called, but he used to always have an auxiliary open on every channel, and it was pointed at, the output of the auxiliary went to a rack mount tuner. So no matter what you were plugged into, you could always check the tuning, which was kind of handy.
Yeah, a bit overkill though.
Bit of overkill, yeah. I mean, you could just plug into it, but I thought it was a smart idea to use if you've got 6 auxiliaries and you're not using them for anything.
I've got a cool little project I did a while back that I call the Proto Synth. It's a synthesizer I built myself, and cool. It's got a bunch of solderless breadboards built up where the knobs would normally be, so you can basically change the circuit however you feel like that in that minute.
Cool.
It's a pretty interesting project, but one of the things I picked up as being very useful when working with it is that I just take an old 1970s analog oscilloscope and plug it into the output of that thing so that I can monitor what the waveforms are doing in real time on the scope. And I think that sort of equipment should be more standard in recording studios and audio in general. Being able to see the waveforms is really helpful as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, no, totally.
That actually brings up a good point. I mean, it's amazing that you never see them. As far as I've never seen an oscilloscope like the one you're talking about for doing electronics in a studio ever, as far as I know.
And to me, that doesn't make sense, because if you really want to know what's going on with a signal, there's very few better ways to just get right down to the root of the problem than just looking at it on an oscilloscope or a spectrum analyzer. And I'm not talking about the cheesy spectrum analyzer that you get in Winamp. I'm talking about like a $10,000 hardware unit. It shows all of the frequency bands up through the gigahertz range, and you can see every harmonic that's getting in the signal. I mean, if you've got a problem with any sort of noise coming out of your system, you'll see a spike on the spectrum analyzer, and you can get right to solving it. I think they would be great for recording studios, and the budget is high enough at a recording studio where they could justify it.
I can see them definitely having them in mastering studios. I mean, they got $15,000 stereo EQs in some mastering studios that I've read about. So the big difference between regular engineering and mastering studio gear is the concentric knobs. So you can click in exactly where you were, not about where you were.
Yeah.
If you have to recall. But yeah, I mean, I was going to say, as far as spectrum analyzer is concerned, I mean, there's lots of plug-in versions of them, but they don't even go as high as gigahertz. I don't think they'll.
Oh no.
They top out at 48 or whatever.
Yeah, kilohertz is where they would stop.
Yeah, that is an interesting point, though. It would be curious to, even for the sake of, say, recording in a room and somebody's got a cell phone in there, is that even,
I wouldn't.
Emanating stuff? I'm just out of curiosity.
It is.
Yeah. sure it is.
It's a radio transmitter, so it is, and it can be picked up by your mixing console and all your preamps. But a lot of those things are really well shielded. I mean, that's why you're paying out the ear for them, right?
Yeah, I've always had a problem with the AKG C12 that I have at work and cell phones. It does not play nice, as like it doesn't play nice at all. Basically, if I'm using that mic, there's no cell phones on the room. Because I mean, the mic was made, in 1985 or whatever it was. So this is pre cell phone usage.
Yeah.
And tube equipment too.
So it just acts as an antenna?
I get some very weirdo sounds coming from the mic if you're talking. What tends to happen, which drives me up the wall, is somebody will answer the phone while recording vocals or after or between takes or something, and they'll have headphones on standing in front of the microphone, and they'll be talking on the phone, and all of a sudden they'll be making not squeals but just very weird sounds. Something that almost like on a oscilloscope, not on a oscilloscope, but like on a like a potentiometer or something, where you would be like squelching, kind of going like a wah-wah kind of a thing.
Yeah, I bet that's some sort of either the digital signal that's being shot across the airwaves by that cell phone is just getting picked up, and it's not surprising. It's RF, and you don't want RF around mics that aren't shielded properly. So
no, exactly. And I mean, well, not even so much not shielded properly as just like super old. But that mic in particular was ungrounded on purpose. Just the out, because there was a weirdo ground hum thing that was happening on it, but it has since been cleared up. Not on the XLR pin. It's not a 3-prong plug. It's only a 2-prong one at this point, I believe. But it solved the hum situation back in the day. So.
Yeah, ground loops can be really annoying.
Oh yeah. Well, we did when we were using an analog console, and the analog console I used to have was RCA, which was a giant pain in the ass because it was 32-channel RCA ins and outs, XLR and quarter-inch insert points, but the actual tape ins and outs were RCA. So that, like 32 channels, you could get into some serious weirdo ground stuff.
Now, since switching over to a digital console, have you found that a lot of the analog problems like 60-cycle hum and ground loops and all that sort of thing just kind of go away?
As far as recording them, I don't get any low-end weirdness anymore. I used to, when we had the analog console, I used to have a 60 hertz hum continuously on the Tascam. However, when I switched to the Soundcraft 2400, which wasn't wired to the ground, I didn't have any hum. And in the Pro Tools digital sort of setup, I don't have any weirdness, but if you pin the console, there is some top-end noise, but we're talking at like what would be stadium volume if I was playing back music in the room.
Yeah.
Have you ever grounded a studio? Like, do you know sort of the process for that?
I know a bit about a thing or two. So in the studio there, have you guys installed sort of a earth ground system?
We wired to the panel. We wired a ground to the panel.
Okay.
So what ended up happening, because the panel is grounded, like there's a separate panel for the studio for the electrical panel.
Mm-hmm.
So what we did, because there was holes through the floor where we ran the snakes, we ran a grounding cable from the back of the console to the actual electrical panel, and that did clear up most of the grounding issues we were having as far as low-end hum. Not electrocuting anybody, but
yeah,
never electrocuted anybody. Just but it was a lot worse with the Tascam, obviously because of the fact that just 32 channels of RCA ins and outs, 64 RCA cables. PatchBay was fun.
Yeah.
It was eighth of an inch. Yeah.
Sure. So, I if I were gonna build a recording studio like in its own building, I think I would probably just put a Faraday cage in the walls.
A what cage?
Faraday cage is basically any metal container, usually made out of some sort of wire mesh, and then you connect the entire cage to an earth ground. So basically, any RF that comes in contact with it automatically gets shunted directly to ground, and it never gets inside the cage.
Right. That makes sense, actually. I've never heard of that before.
Yeah, this is, I think that it would be good to bring a little bit more engineering back into this sort of thing, because electrical engineers know some tricks that are really useful to helping everyday problems that audio engineers have to deal with. And, if you don't have that background in electronics, you kind of have to just sort of guess at what's going on sometimes. Back in the day, like in the old school 50s buzzcut dude era, they had electrical engineers working in all the studios taking care of these problems. And I think it would be kind of cool to see that kind of thinking come back into things more. It's kind of difficult, though, with everything being done in the box now. We're getting farther and farther away from that sort of mentality.
I agree. It scares me, actually, matter of factly. No, I mean, professional type guys love the in the box stuff for the, not every one of us do, but we do like the idea of it for certain things. But it's also opened that whole door to everybody doing it, which, is fine, but it tends to also take away from what was originally sort of voodoo.
Well, you can sort of look at it as like, damn kids, get off my lawn.
Yeah.
Or you can look at it as more like, okay, you got all these kids with no budgets trying to record music in their bedrooms and garages or whatever, and it's an opportunity to introduce them to a whole realm of learning that they would never be exposed to if they hadn't been into music. So maybe it's a good thing.
Yeah, I think it is. I think I'm curious to know what the future holds. I think recording studios, as they are nowadays, as it stands already, they're becoming not extinct but dinosaurs. But it sooner rather than later, there's going to be a lot less, big studios out there, which is is fine. It is good for the like you say, the cool thing about it is people are still making music. It's not that there's any lack of. Actually, I think there's more interest in music nowadays than there ever was.
Yeah, because people have access to being able to make their own again, which is a really good thing. I mean, for a long time, the recording studios and more accurately, the record labels sort of controlled the whole thing, and that's no longer the case, and I think that's really good. I know it's not necessarily good for professional recording engineers like yourself, but for everyone else, it's really good.
Yeah, no, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around what the next step is, actually, technically, but that's a discussion for another time. For the time being, I'll continue to keep doing what it is that I do. But yeah, no, it is good. The only thing I think about the whole new technology thing is that it's great that there's more interest in music, but as just a music listener, you have to sort of sort through quite a lot more stuff until you get to the stuff that you quite like or that is really good. Do you find that?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I don't spend as much time listening to other people's music as I should probably. And when I do find things I like, it tends to be more on the raw side of things. So to find it, you kind of have to go to those backwaters of the internet where some random person is posting a random video of themselves playing somewhat okay, but singing amazingly. because they have not been discovered, and that's the best time to get in.
There's definitely a difference in sometimes the polish ruins the original thought.
Yeah, that can definitely be the case. There's so many artists that I've found on YouTube, and I've started watching their sort of videos of them doing their original work, and it seems like the ones who are good always end up following the same path. They get better and better at making their sound more polished, and eventually they start doing more and more covers, and they get, some sort of deal going, be it their own small label or working with someone else. And that's about the time where I just unfollow them because they cease to be interesting.
Mm-hmm. No, and I agree with you. The one specifically that pops to my brain is that Maria Aragorn. Did you ever hear any of her stuff?
No, not that one.
No, she's from Winnipeg, and she did you'll have to check it out. She did a cover of she's a great piano player, great singer. She's like 13 years old. She did a cover of a Lady Gaga song. She ended up on Ellen. She ended up on stage with Lady Gaga. Like, it was a crazy, crazy story. And I haven't heard anything from her since, which is kind of, I guess, maybe the opposite of sort of what you were talking about. But yeah, just a YouTube sensation. Kind of a neat story. I was going to say, we were talking about RF. Have you ever had the old AM radio coming through the amp thing happen?
Oh yeah, sure. That's a pretty common one, especially if you're in an area where the transmitters are really beefy. Yeah, it's not hard because amplitude modulation, it physically, in the physics sense, works in a way where it's very, very simple to demodulate it down to a audible audio frequency sort of range. My partner in crime over here, Addie, she's actually built a AM demodulator, essentially an AM radio out of a razor blade and a pencil.
Really?
Yeah, if you heat the razor blade up, you can get an oxidized layer on it, like blue razors. You may be old enough to remember those, Shane. Yeah, so that oxidized layer acts as sort of a semiconductor. Electricity only goes through it in one direction. When you touch it up against carbon, which is, of course, what pencils are made out of. So you squeeze those two things together into a junction, and it acts as a very, very simple diode. And the amplitude goes back and forth through that diode, and it sort of demodulates it, and you can hear the audio coming out the other side. And that same effect can happen in any number of different ways in your audio equipment. In various oscillators and diodes. Any of them can act as these demodulators, and then you start picking up your local baseball game or whatever.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. I was going to say that was almost worth an F-bomb at that point, just for the sake of having built that and having it work. That's cool. The science and technology behind it is amazing. I mean, it's stuff that people have been doing for a long time, but to be able to build it at home and have it work is crazy. Yeah, neat. Totally neat. I was going to say, the only time that it's ever happened to me is either with a really old tube amp or Marshalls, and I think it's just mostly because of the immense amount of gain.
Yeah.
And single coils.
Yeah, it's usually, the single coil on our Dan Electro U1 will do it. The tube preamps will do it occasionally, especially if you have a long wire going between your mic and the preamp. The shorter the wire, the better. Basically, any metal in front of the first gain stage is acting as an antenna. So, you want to make sure you keep that as short as possible.
Totally. When you're doing that, are you using XLR and still having trouble?
Yeah, you can eliminate a lot of it by using balanced XLR. But around here, we do experimental things a lot. So the reason why you'll get it more on, a guitar is because it's not a balanced signal. It's an unbalanced instrument cable.
Right.
And that doesn't have I don't want to get into explaining the electrical properties of unbalanced versus balanced today, because that's like a whole show unto itself. But the short version is that with a balanced cable, any interference that comes in is basically stomped out just by the way that balanced cables work.
Yeah, I believe it's a phase thing, but yeah, no, you're right.
It is a phase thing. You've got your phase and you got your inverted phase, and they get summed together on the other side.
Zeroes it out.
Yep. It's absolutely brilliant. Yeah.
Well, it's exactly the same premise as how humbuckers work.
Yep.
It's exactly the same. And if you're a guitar player, like, oh, yeah, that makes sense now, I get it. But yeah, no, that's definitely a whole show unto itself.
Completely. So I don't know. Yeah, we've dealt with some AM problems here and there, but yeah, it's pretty easy to fix that kind of thing. Basically, if you have AM problems, you need to adjust things. More of the interference issues that we have is because we have so many computers and monitors and all that running up here in the studio. We'll pick up high frequency whines from CFLs and the LCD monitors in the single coil pickup really bad. I can't even use it to record up here.
No, yeah. Anytime I ever do any recording at work in front of the computer, I usually 9 times out of 10 I'm just turning the monitor off or having the guitar. It's funny with single coils because you can. It's hard when you're engineering and playing and doing everything at the same time, but you just move that like half an inch one way, and it's like, oh, there goes the noise. It's gone now. Have you done that before? The sort of weird walk. Oh, it's good if I turn my back to you and at a 90-degree angle.
Done it 100 times. Yeah, it's
yeah.
And basically, that's because a single coil it's basically a magnet with a coil wrapped around it, and if you turn that within the electromagnetic field. Right, if you turn that coil so that it's in between the bands are just going to whoosh right past it, and it's not going to act as an antenna.
And
yeah, but if you turn it so that it's pointing the correct direction to pick up that wave, then you're going to hear it. You're going to hear 60 cycle hum like crazy.
I wonder. This is completely probably boneheaded, but if you were playing a single coil guitar, and is there anything you can do to humbuck it, having a magnet on you? Maybe, probably not.
No, because you need the signals to be with a humbucking, phase reversal and then resumming. They need to be the signal part needs to be absolutely identical, right?
Right. Yeah.
So the closer it is to identical, the cleaner it's going to be on the other side. And that's why humbucker pickups sound muddy compared to single coil pickups, because a humbucker has 2 pickups. They're not exactly the same, and the slight differences get canceled out by the balanced nature of the recombination, and that's why you lose some high end on a humbucker.
I actually have hot rails in my guitar, which I don't know if is technically a humbucker. Technically, I think it is, as far as the pole pieces are concerned. But it sounds quite a lot more like the old single coils that were in there, sans the hum.
Yeah.
There is still a little bit, but it's not like it was with single coils. I don't know. I quite like it as an alternative at this point. I'm considering doing it to the other guitar.
Yeah.
How are we doing for time?
We just got a minute here left. Single coils they sound amazing. I know almost everyone uses the humbuckers because you just kind of have to, but if you had a nice guitar room with a Faraday cage in the wall, you could use single coils all day long and get that crisp, clean, high end that we're all missing out on.
I agree. I almost didn't want to do it to the Strat, and I still have the pickups, but the Strat that I had, but it was getting to the point playing live that I needed a reliable, comfortable guitar that wasn't friggin' noisy. So I had to sacrifice single coil, yumminess for the noise was driving me bonkers. But I'm not going to play a Les Paul, so that's what but yeah, I mean, if every single recording that I've ever done, more often than not, it's the single coil guitars that I'm quite a lot more happy with in the studio. Even my Telecaster, which is actually not even grounded properly, in the studio sounds great. It's pretty well clean. It's just, I don't know. You're right. You have the guitar room, and it makes a huge difference, especially on a recording.
Yeah. So I guess today's episode was all about how sometimes the analog mojo of the world can, interfere with what we're trying to do. But if you understand it, you can use that same power to get the things you want to happen much more easily. So, if you're into this kind of thing, take the time, learn about how electronics work if you want to. If you don't, just do it in the box. That's fine too. As long as you're making music, I don't care.
Exactly. I was going to say it's analog, wanted analog mojo versus unwanted analog mojo is basically what it is. Because somebody else is happy with their AM signal. It's just, screwing with my guitar amp sound.
Yeah, the dude listening to the baseball game is very appreciative of that electromagnetic interference. Okay, Shane, that's all the time we have for today. You guys can find this show every Friday, usually in the evenings at patchbay.tv. There's an RSS feed there on the page if you want to automatically have it downloaded by your cell phone, your iTunes, anything like that. It'll work. Or you can just push play on the page. It's really easy. That's it for us for this week. We'll see you guys next week.
Good night.